Good afternoon. My name is Kim Dorman, and I serve as the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Princeton Public Library. We are thrilled to have the opportunity to partner with the Paul Robeson House of Princeton and many other partners to celebrate the 125th anniversary of Paul Robeson's birth. I hope that you have had or will have the chance to see the exhibition that library staff and the Paul Robeson House of Princeton and our friends at the Historical Society of Princeton put together on the third floor. Before we get started with our program, there's some housekeeping notes that I would like to mention. This program is being recorded, thank you, Mariam, and will be available on the library's YouTube channel in about a week's time. Also, this room is T-Coil enabled, so if you have a T-Coil enabled device, please feel welcome to put it on at this time. If you don't but would like to try it, we have headsets that are available at the back of the room. In order for the system to work and to make sure that everyone can hear what's being said, we ask that everyone who's speaking speak into a microphone. So if you have questions, please wait for us to bring you the mic. And speaking of noise and devices, please take this time to turn off or silence any devices that you've brought with you. It's now my great pleasure to reintroduce someone who I have the great pleasure of knowing, and many of you have now met, Dr. Joy Barnes-Johnson, Programming Coordinator for the Paul Robeson House, and many other things. Dr. Joy?
Thank you again. I wanted to take a few moments to do, whenever I come into this room, it reminds me of Not in Our Town and our partnership to acknowledge that we are standing and sitting and existing on stolen lands. I also want to take the moment to acknowledge the labor that was required to build institutions that we enjoy on a daily basis. I want to remind you that there is a Black history that is rich in love and community that sits in this plaza called Albert Hines Plaza, and acknowledge the life and legacy of all the freedom fighters who have worked here in New Jersey, in Pennsylvania, in New York, and throughout our nation. I also wanted to remind you that you can come back. There's no necessary occasion, but we would invite you, I want to invite everyone who can to join us tomorrow as we celebrate Easter with our sunrise service at 6:30 in the Princeton Cemetery and our Robeson breakfast at 7:30 at the Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church. Next Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. nightly, we will have a Robeson Film Festival where we are screening 3 Robeson-inspired films. The Tallest Tree on Monday. Tuesday, filmmaker Lorna Frizzell Johnson, 7 Square Miles, which is about incarceration and challenges between Princeton and Trenton. It's really a Trenton story. And then Here I Stand on Wednesday. Next Friday in Philadelphia and next Saturday, events will be happening there. So I wanted to let you know that today is about alliance and community, and many members from the Robeson Alliance for the celebration of the 125th birthday of Paul Robeson are here. If you are an Alliance organization member, please stand up. Very excited. And so it is absolutely been our pleasure as a board program committee to welcome you here. Many of you will leave before we get a chance to say goodbye. And so I wanted to take that time and say thank you now. And so Kim, I'll put the rest of the program in her. Well, are you going to introduce Roz? Okay, yes, okay.
It's my great pleasure to introduce Rosalind Anderson Flood, wonderful member of our community, and also serves on the board of the Paul Robeson House of Princeton.
Thank you. Good afternoon, folks. Thank you for being with us on this truly wonderful occasion, the 125th birthday celebration of Paul Robeson. The panel discussion that you are about to hear is entitled Becoming Gatekeepers of Our Truth. And we'll have a presentation by Dr. Jessica Jamese Williams. Dr. Williams is a Black feminist artist and educator dedicated to cultivating authenticity as a means to empowerment. Following a decade-long career in higher education, she now works primarily as a client-proclaimed discomfort doula. Dr. J's work often focuses on helping individuals and organizations process uncomfortable elements that are often barriers to connection, engagement, belonging, and inclusion. And notably, she contributed an essay that was called Black Surrender Within the Ivory Tower to the New York Times best-selling anthology, You Are Your Best Thing, Vulnerability, Shame, and the Black Experience. Dr. Williams will be joined in conversation by Jacora Thompson, who is director of the Paul Robeson Cultural Center at Rutgers University, and Geraldine Williams, who is the Assistant Director of Student Engagement and Leadership at the Pace Center for Civic Engagement at Princeton University. Thank you, ladies, and we're ready to begin.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'm Jessica. My students usually call me Dr. J. More than welcome to call me either one of those. I'll answer. But I always start any talk that I'm giving with what qualifies me to be in the room giving that talk. I'm always nosy. Why do we have this speaker? Why are they talking to us? So I just like to go ahead and scratch that itch for people who are curious like me. So as you heard, I am an artist, I'm an activist, I'm an educator, and I teach leadership. I have been working in higher education and then now working as a consultant, teaching people, honestly, how to embrace humanity. When I think about what my job is and what I ultimately end up doing every day, it is inviting grace, teaching forgiveness, compassion and empathy. And that's pretty much it. Over and over again, adding to, right? And so how that came to be was through a lot of strife, struggle, and panic disorder. For me, so I'll take you back to before how I got to the essay, right? So I wrote this essay called Black Surrender Within the Ivory Tower, and I'll read a little bit read a little bit of it in a second, excuse me. But the essay came about because I was working, as I'm sure many of you all were, during the summer of 2020, and I was watching the footage of George Floyd, and I was going to work every day. And I got angry real quick at having to go to work while all of this turmoil was going on. And in education, there's people sending emails, or there's people not sending emails, people crafting emails. If you are any kind of DEI person, so you're the one that's crafting the email, of how do we respond to this? What do we say? How do we let our community know that we hear you, that you're seen, and that we understand what's going on? And in my head, I'm thinking, let all Black people go home. Right? Like, that's all I would want my email to say. But I'm just thinking about, like, what do I do with this? What do I do with it as an educator? What do I do with it as an administrator? What do I do with it as a Black person just existing in the world? What do I do with all of the things that I was feeling? And what came to me was that two things. One was, I'm not the only one feeling this. And so it was kind of an immediate reach for community. And number two was that I don't want to pretend that I'm okay while I'm feeling this. I want to be absolutely clear to everyone around me. I am struggling. I am grieving. I am hurting. I'm angry. I'm frustrated. I wanted all of that to be out in the open. And what I found was that a lot of spaces don't know how to hold that. They don't know how to hold Black rage, Black female rage, or Black female grief, or sadness, or vulnerability, really, right? I just felt so open and exposed. And where was my support? And so it was from that place that I got on Twitter and I went to Brene Brown and I said, hey, Brene, you write a lot about vulnerability. And I'm Black, and I'm just going to tell you that vulnerability in Black skin looks very different. I cannot show up and cry and tell people that I'm sad and tell people that I'm hurting without there being serious repercussions, right, to my job, my livelihood, but also possibly to my person. And so I posed that struggle to her, and I wrote that tweet to her at like 10 o'clock on a Monday night, right? So go to sleep, and I wake up in the middle of the night and I think, oh my gosh, she's gonna see that tweet. And if she sees that tweet, is she gonna think I'm just another person complaining? Or is she gonna think that I'm somebody who possibly has a solution? And I wanted to be somebody with a solution. And so in the middle of the night, I wrote a blog post and I called it Vulnerability in Black Skin. And I wrote about going to work after Ferguson and how I was so sad and no one said anything to me on my beautiful campus in Southern California. I'm from San Diego. And so I was in San Diego, this beautiful campus, and no one said anything. I'm in all Black. I felt like I was seconds away from crying at any moment, and no one said anything. And I couldn't decide whether, I had it in my essay or my blog post I was writing, I couldn't decide whether it was a good thing or a bad thing that no one said anything. Because if someone had said anything, I would have fallen apart. And so I was able to keep it together because they didn't say anything. But on the other hand, why didn't anybody say anything? And so I wrote about that. I wake up the next morning and Brene Brown is in my DMs and she says, hey, I think you're on to something. You should write more about it. Do you think you can give me an essay in about 2 weeks? I'm working on this project with Tarana Burke. Tarana is one of the founders, or the founder of the Me Too movement. I was like, okay, sure. I don't know what I thought she was working on, but it ended up being this. So this book is called You Are Your Best Thing. There are 20 essays from 20 Black incredible writers, educators, artists, activists who are telling our stories about how we move through vulnerability and our experience with authenticity in Black skin. And my particular story was all about that struggle that I'm describing to you of what do I do with everything that I'm feeling in my spaces? And how do I make it so that my spaces can palate me, can tolerate me, can accept the fullness of my humanity? And so I'm going to read a little bit and then we'll get back into the discussion. So I wrote, to be Black in predominantly white spaces for the majority of your days often means affirming yourself or going without affirmation and representation for long stretches at a time. Aggressions like I don't see color or assumptions that educational achievement somehow offsets racism and sexism are laughable and offensive. We are intentionally robbed of opportunities to see the spectrum of who we can become. And without an accurate reflection, our world becomes a funhouse mirror, distorted expectations that we can never meet. More often than not, people around me believe that they are doing me a favor by not acknowledging my differences. In South Africa, a common greeting is sawubona, which translates to I see you or I acknowledge your existence. The response to this greeting is Sikona, which means I am here, and when you see me, you bring me into existence. The more I think about it, the more it feels as though in every space I enter, I'm waiting for someone to exchange this pleasantry with, not just in words, but in intention. And usually, I'm met with silence. What I've come to understand is that most people lack the capacity because we've only been taught to notice whiteness. This white world of higher education was not designed to acknowledge me as I am, to value me and people who look like me. So often, the only way I'm allowed to be seen is when I perform and take on the traits of whiteness. I'm heard when I speak articulately or when I dress professionally. I am allowed to exist, but just barely. The open neglect of my authentic being authorized by someone else's poverty of consciousness. And so it's just a little bit where I talk about how Jessica, being asked to limit myself, to dim myself, to be different, to turn down the volume of my being because someone else can't handle it. And my essay and really my life is saying no, right? And pushing back in a way that says, not only do I not accept the limitations that you've given me, but I'm going to force myself into expansion. I'm going to be the gatekeeper of my own truth, right? That's what this is about. I am going to decide who I am and what I answer to, not someone else. And someone else's poverty of consciousness. That means what you can imagine for me has absolutely nothing to do with my potential and possibility, right? So if someone else, this is my favorite thing, Black people don't fill in the blank. Well, if I do, am I not Black? Tell me now. And so it's this invitation, I see it as an opportunity to expand not only what other people think of Blackness or womanness or masculinity, right? Men don't cry, men don't wear pink, men don't do this. Well, if I'm a man and I do it, then I guess they do. And so when you reclaim yourself for yourself, that's Audre Lorde, right? When you reclaim yourself for yourself, the world around you has no other choice but to expand. They might do it unwillingly, begrudgingly, but when you stand in your fullness and you say, no, this is who I am, and you're not allowed to only speak to one part of me, because I'm going to answer with the fullness of my voice, the fullness of my experience, and the fullness of my humanity and my being. People have to respond to that volume. Right? And so that's like the dialogue that I want to have with Geraldine and Jacora, specifically around how can we individually show up to be seen? How can we contribute to the truth of who we are and to the truth of what Blackness is and how Blackness is seen? But also, how can we be a part of a community that's supportive of that kind of work and supportive of people showing up in the fullness of their humanity? Because otherwise, what happens is you're treated like a cancer. Literally, when cancer enters the body, what happens? The white blood cells start to fight it off because there is this bad thing, right? There's this pathogen in your body that's not supposed to be there. And so when you invite change into a system and you start to play with the system fights it off like a virus, like an infection. And so you have to think about, how can I create change that is of the system, that is of the body? And that's where I think art comes in. Because if I look at art across time, it tells me the truth of humanity, no matter what the history books say. art is going to tell me what the sadness felt like, what the breadth of it was, what the depth of it was, the colors and the tone and the vibrancy of the emotion is in the heart of the time. And so we as artists, and it doesn't even mean you have to be like a photographer or a writer, but in the way that you express, right? That's what I mean by artistry. The way in which you express yourself and express your being out into the world, how is it resonating the truth of who you are? And how is it creating a space so that it welcomes the truth of all humanity, of everybody around you? Right? So I'll turn it over to my good piece over here if we want to just start talking. What are your thoughts, first of all?
My thoughts. Many thoughts. So hi everyone again. My name is Jakora Thompson. I currently serve as the director of the Paul Robeson Cultural Center at Rutgers University of New Brunswick. And as you were talking, Jessica, what I was thinking about this week on our campus, we had Robeson Week, where artists are the gatekeepers of truth. Their civilization's radical voice was our theme for the week. And really what that was a chance to, I spent a lot of my time working with young adults and helping them think about how your voice and your legacy can give service to not just your institution, but your community. And I spent a lot of time thinking about sort of what that means and what that looks like. There are students coming from all walks of life, right? I think about what it would have been like for Paul Robeson to have a place on his campus where he could have just been, like, just be Paul, right? Not a scholar, not an athlete, not someone who has to like put on this barrier, like this coat to deal with a predominantly white institution, right? And so as you were talking, I was just thinking about the humanity that we try to craft spaces for people to just be themselves. And in predominantly white spaces, when you're Black, you're coming together, really defining your Blackness, like for the first time. If you're like, I came from a really small town, 1 square mile, and everyone looked like me in some capacity, right? And then I had to go, I also am a Rutgers alumni. So I had to go to this place where for the first time I was not of the majority. And so what did it mean to find spaces to just exist? And yeah, so that leads me to a question I think that like I would raise to Jessica and to Geraldine, even like, what does it mean to love yourself out loud in a world insistent on denying your humanity?
You want to go first? You want me to go first?
I can start.
Okay.
Hi everyone, Jamese Williams. I work at the Peace Center for Civic Engagement at Princeton University. I'm a Jersey girl, born and bred. I went to Rutgers as well. I grew up right up the street in Somerset. And I would say I had a little bit of an opposite experience than you, growing up right next to Rutgers, we're a big Rutgers family. And this area of New Jersey, I think I grew up in a very diverse space. And it wasn't until actually I went to grad school, and Jessica and I went to the same graduate school in Southern California in San Diego. That was where I had to like navigate this piece of identity and finding myself in a space that was so far from home. Not that many Black folks on campus. And it was a struggle. There was a moment where I was like really, I really loved my graduate work. I loved the work I was doing in the community. I was doing community engagement work there as well. I had a really lovely cohort, but I wasn't happy. And it was a really tough thing of like, what is this? Like, what is the missing component? And I think part of that was seeing myself in the spaces around me. My first year, I was the only Black woman in our master's program. My second year, I was one of 3. Mm-hmm. In our campus center, it was me and actually that were the only Black women in that entire campus center, like literally thinking about the center of that community. And it was tough to find those entrances into conversations about my lived experiences, to find ways to bring it up, to find ways to engage with it that wasn't just like, happy or, I'm a Black woman. Like there's so much like in that, there's so much depth. And for me, it was turning up and saying, I find myself in this space that I've had to make for myself, that I had to make space for myself, that I had to push, that I had to be real when, folks were coming in to interview for the program. And I was like, okay, well, there's a lot of great things here, but this particular experience, this particular community is not made for you here necessarily. And so it took a lot of taking up space. It took a lot of guts to advocate for myself to my supervisors, to find other mentors. And that's part of the way I found and got to know Jessica as well, is that, I had to go beyond the space that my institution had created for me. I had to search for people, reflections. I definitely turned to art. I definitely turned to music. I found interesting mentors to be able to see myself and place myself and love myself in that way. And it's very hard. But it's powerful. And I feel like that's part of the work I do now at Princeton. It's probably my institution. My actual office is in the Carly Field Center off the 3rd floor. And my role is to help students see themselves beyond the academics, see themselves beyond the classroom, and to find the community and the connection and the real world application of their passions. Connect with that. And that's one of the things I love to tell students is, we talk about an orange bubble. I'm from New Jersey. I'm from right here. I'm from right down the street. My family is from New Brunswick and Edison and Trenton and all of these areas. And there's a whole world outside of here. And there's a whole world of connection, of just getting them to go past Nassau Street. is some work, but to be able to see themselves and that piece around truth, that's a big thing for Princeton. And thinking about this scholarly excellence is that we're challenging our students to find truth in the classroom, but I'm truth beyond. Truth for you, because there are ways and spaces that the classroom can be a mirror, can be a portal, can be community. There's also a lot of ways where that is not the experience. Right. And to be able to connect around passions beyond, be able to connect to the reality that, there is a diverse community in Princeton, that there is a beautifully deep historical community here that students don't necessarily get to hear about, or people don't necessarily know about when you just see or hear Princeton. And to see the legacy and to connect with the community and to understand the ways that your community reflects you, to have that care, that reciprocal and mutual respect and relationship building is what got me through some of these spaces. It's what got me to think about, who I want to be, what I want to do as an educator. Right. And it's a challenge, but I think the more we challenge ourselves to do that, we open up space. I think Father Greg Doyle talks about, you stand at the margins and you keep backing out in order to create more space and more entry points. And that is the challenge, but it's the joy.
I think, very similarly to Geraldine, our graduate school. So for context, our graduate school, University of San Diego, is very expensive for one.
Private
Catholic, affluent. Literally about half the students just write a check of $70,000 a year to go to school. Most of the students are not on financial aid. We have a lot that are in the 1%. That's just the reality of the makeup of our school. And so, you think about when you're in college, you throw a pizza party, they don't care because they're getting a private jet to Vegas, literally. They're driving Maseratis, they're driving Lamborghinis. We're not making this up. This is like our first year students, our second year students, wealth on a whole other level, class dynamics, playing all of these kind of games. And so for me, I grew up in Atlanta, and I was very used to seeing Blackness across all kinds of spectrums, class, like gender, sexuality, everything. Just, you can imagine it. I see it in Black because I'm from Atlanta, right? And I get to San Diego, and I don't see anybody. I don't see Black people in service work positions. I don't see Black people at the airport. I'm not seeing Black people anywhere. And it wasn't until like Geraldine, I'm having to dig and kind of find, I got my in working with some D9 organizations and then community service organizations, and just trying to find, like, where is the community? I eventually got into the Black art scene in San Diego, but it took time, and it stretched me. And I think it made me love my Blackness even more, because there is something beautiful. I think about this like the HBCU experience. There's something beautiful about being in a space where you can see yourself reflected back. Yeah. And there's also something beautiful about not needing that mirror. And it's not that one experience is better than the other. And I don't think you can even go too long, with the mirror, or too long without the mirror. But I think having, I didn't go to an HBCU from Atlanta. I did, but I didn't. You know what I'm saying? I grew up in Wakanda. So, I have that experience of seeing myself reflected back to me, and Black excellence reflected back to me. And then I have the experience of being in San Diego and having to tell myself, you are excellence. You are Black excellence. You are, and remind myself of kind of the stock that I'm made of, and my ancestors and my lineage. And so it's an interesting way of kind of like learning how to love yourself, because you're not hearing as many other people tell you you're great, you're pretty, even dates. I feel ugly in San Diego, because when you go out, I can go out in any kind of anything and nobody will say anything to me. And then I'll wear that same thing on the East Coast, and it's like I'm all of a sudden a woman again. And it's like, oh, my context has changed. Mm-hmm. But those are the things that you live with. And for so long, if you go for too long, like if I stayed in California all the time, I might really think I wasn't Cuban, But it's like, if I actually was paying attention in that way to the silence of my environment. And so I've had to learn how to fill my silence with affirmation. And I've had to learn how to build community that will affirm me. And knowing that community looks very different than the community that I grew up with. Like, my childhood friends, very similar to me with like our Black experiences, even if we went to predominantly white institutions for high school or college, we can still go home and have like kind of just fall back into our routine and our environment, our community. But I can also go sit with a senator or the president of the university and feel like where I'm like the raisin in the rice and feel okay. And I've learned that not everybody has that full range. And that's okay too. I tell people all the time, I feel like for Jessica Jamese, I'm meant to be able to sustain long periods of time without that affirmation. Everybody cannot. And that's okay, because that's where my work is, right? I'm meant to be in the work of challenging white people and making them uncomfortable and pushing on those spaces a little bit. Whereas somebody else who's like, I need to be around Black culture, Black life, Black music, Black food, Black da-da, their work is probably rooted in doing it right there. And that's what I think is important also, is like when you understand the truth of yourself, it's not really a race against, I can't be Jacora, I can't be Geraldine, I can't do, and we may do very similar work, but the spaces that we do it in are called to us to do that work are very different, right? And the communities that we talk to can be very different. And that's cool, because I feel like it has to come from all spaces. We're trying to change a culture and trying to change a society that has been rooted in white supremacy, rooted in patriarchy, rooted in xenophobia. And if we're only coming at it from one angle versus coming at it from all sides, right? I want my garbage man to be hyped up about social justice work too. I talk to my Uber driver about stuff, anybody, because I want people to, I was thinking, I know you have another question, I'm sorry, tangential. We were listening to Dr. Joy's son did the film, and they were talking about how Paul Robeson, like as soon as he started becoming like a communist empathizer, he was blacklisted. I'm like, oh, I can't wait for America to blacklist me. Because I feel like that's when you know you're doing the work. As soon as the FBI has you on a list, not yet, because I love TSA pre-check, but as soon as they have you on a list, you're doing something right. You're attacking the system in a way that people are noticing and saying, oh, you're trying to impact change, like for real change. Yeah, I am. I'm that girl. And so I think, I think it's interesting, like when you kind of get the mark on your back. But my sneaky little way to get around that is by saying, I'm going to plant seeds and I'm going to empower communities. So you can put a mark on my back, but this is like Hydra, like you cut off the head of one and 3 more pop up because I planted seeds. Like I'm out here telling people, like, you can change the world just by taking up space and being yourself. Because the world wants you to be like this. And if you just dare to not, you're already a revolution. If you dare to love yourself in a world that has told you that you have to be thin to be loved, you have to be light-skinned or fair-skinned to be loved, you have to be blonde to be loved, you have to be straight to be loved, you have to be able-bodied to be loved, or worthy, or of value. And if you dare to say, no, I don't, I'm worthy and I'm of value just because I am, by virtue of being here. And if you reclaim that energy, you reclaim your humanity, other people don't have a choice but to do the same.
I took a lot of thoughts when I chuckled at the Hydra reference. It's all the Marvel things.
Yes, MCU.
MCU. But as when I was thinking about what it means to embrace your humanity, similar to what you're saying, I used to come in spaces, I feel like I had to put pieces of me away to fit into a space, right? Like I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a small town. I used to think that coming from an economically disadvantaged neighborhood and being in a predominantly white space now, I had I had to I had to hide those parts of me. I had to put my blackness in the box. And really this idea of like exceptionalism that's really prominent when you are the raisin and the rice, as you said earlier. And for me, that humanity discovering my own humanity and allowing myself to just be was being like, oh, these things that happen to me don't say anything about me. I'm still worthy to be in these spaces, and how do I make sense of that, right? I'm from Asbury Park, and so when I first went to college, I'm from Asbury Park. People would be like, ugh. And now, as time went on, I would say, I'm from Asbury Park, and they'd be like, oh my God, I love the beaches there. It's so nice downtown. I'm like, yeah, we have 2 different experiences. I I started to, okay, like your thoughts around what it means to be from that space or place, like I'm me and I deserve to be here and I'm worthy. And I started to find my voice, and this is how I actually met Dr. Jessica, was writing and blogging, and this is before people were making money off of it, but like finding out that, oh, I have a voice. I feel like my voice represents people out there, people like me who come from environments like mine, who have experienced what it's like to grow up without their moms in their lives or raised by your grandparents. And these things don't mean that you don't have success, you can't make something of your life, and that you're welcome in these spaces. And so in that is how we met, through writing, which is in art, right? And what that looks like. And so my next question is really, what are the possibilities for Black art and representation of Black life within art?
You know, for me, art is processing. This shirt I'm wearing is my art. I drew this about 3 years ago. It was just the woman at first. And I was going through something, and I just scribbled out this woman in oil pastel. And my best friend was like, she messaged me about a month ago, and she was like, I need that woman. Like, I need her on a coffee mug, on a notebook, on something. Like, I just need to have it in my home. I was like, okay, girl. So I went and made some shirts. And then I found myself, today we were getting dressed, I was like, I want to wear my shirt because we're talking about Black art. And I think, you know, I added the text, to be born Black is to be born blessed. Because that's really how I feel. But for me, when I express, whether it's art or performing or, you know, writing, I see it as really two things. It's very spiritual for me. I feel like it's obedience as an intermediary, right? I get to be a vessel when I express myself and when I'm being creative. So in that way, I feel like it's like spiritual obedience. And then on the other hand, I feel like it's absolutely the mark of my humanity, right? It's like my signature, even though it's different every single time. But nobody else could create in the ways that I could. You know, when you hear songs written by your favorite songwriter, even if you don't know, but you're like, how do I know that that's a Prince song? But you just know, because it's like a fingerprint. It's something remarkable about how people create. And I think for me, it's just my way of saying, like, I was here. And this is how I was, or this is who I was in those moments that I was here. Like this woman, she was just going through something with her body. And so, like, I remember drawing it, like the stomach, I just was like, I remember those strokes, you know, of just going over and over and over and over and feeling like, oh, I just want to make peace with this belly. I want to make peace with my body. I want to make peace. And so that's what this piece was about just like making peace with the flesh. And for me, it's like almost like a journal entry. Like once I draw it, I'm like, okay, I'm done. And a lot of times when I write, that's how I write too. I'll write, I'm like, I'm done. And then people, like Shakora and I used to blog, people would say, oh, I read your blog. I'm like, oh. What'd I say? Was it good? Right, let me go back and read it. Because for me, like I said, it was spiritual, and it was it was like a moment, and then it was gone for me. And honestly, this essay was even a practice in that kind of artistic surrender, because Shakora is one of my like best friends in the world, and because we met writing, normally if I was writing something big, I would share with her. She will tell you, she did not read this essay. Nobody read this essay until it was printed from Penguin Random House. One, because I thought that at any moment they were going to cut it, and they were going to be like, we don't need your essay, you're fine. That was one, I was just scared. But the other was because I really wanted to just trust my instinct, my artistic instinct, my voice as a writer. I wanted to trust what I put out there and how I said it. For me, writing is very like a song. I wanted to trust that I had like the lyrics right, the chorus right, and that it was gonna vibe. Like people were gonna be excited to hear it in the way that it landed. And so that meant that I had to keep like the biggest secret I had ever kept. But it was also very scary because it's this big artistic offering and I haven't gotten any affirmation, validation. Nobody said, hey girl, maybe you shouldn't say it like this, or maybe you're telling too much of your business. Like nobody said that to me because I hadn't shared it. But again, it was just like, I'm going to just be an artist on this one and just say it's an offering and just let it be out into the world. And I think that's kind of the best thing, that it's the most freeing thing that I think a Black person could do is just be. And I think when we express, when we create, you know, it's always like, oh, the Grammys are so light or the Oscars are so light. Man, fuck the Grammys. Sorry. But you know what I mean? Like, oh, why do I need the Grammys, the Oscars, the Emmys, Essence, you know, NAACP? Why do I need affirmation from any of it? It's nice. It's wonderful if you like me, but I gotta like me. I gotta love me. I gotta have value. So that's why I feel like where I am with my art and where I am with where I hope Black people can get to with their art and their giving and their offering is just saying, you know what, it's enough that I'm here and it's enough that I've scribbled my name on this paper and whatever that, you know, metaphorically looks like for you. And just being okay with the offering. Long answer.
I think I like to think of art as a practice. And I agree that kind of just being is an expression. And that I think we've, not just we, but like as a culture, as a society, art has become this thing that has been gatekept. That has been like, oh, like if you want to be an artist, you have to go to this particular school, you have to have these kinds of resources. But the reality is that like art is art. Like it doesn't have to be like, oh, you know, I went to Parsons and now I can say this is art. Whatever you put out there is art. And I also think it doesn't necessarily have to be in very particular forms. I come always from like a performing arts background and I haven't necessarily been as immersed in that as often, but I get to help produce and pull together a summer camp over the summer for our local youth, and it's offering them opportunities to get involved in like musical theater that aren't necessarily like you have to like completely have to go through the process of trying out in middle school, which is a wild time. You know, you get this opportunity to engage, and I also just think about like I'm always in awe of Black people. Always. I'm just like, you know, what we've gone through, what we continue to go through, and yet, like, we create. Like, the culture is rich, is real. I was just telling a friend, like, I'm not on Twitter like that, but I have Twitter so I can look at Black Twitter.
Yeah.
Like,
it's
a thing.
Hashtags.
Yes, like, I always gotta find it. And I think, like, there's lots of sorts of ways that we express ourselves, and we offer possibilities. You know, whether it is, you know, our meme collections, whether it is our Twitter threads, whether it is the way we show up physically in space. Like one of the things when I was interviewing to be at Princeton, the conversation I had with my supervisor, or kind of a supervisor at the time, who's a wonderful Black woman, Shara Collins, for anybody that, you know, yeah. I was like, I change my hair a lot. I will go from a fro to string hair to braids. Right now, this is blue. It was black at the time, but I went into purple after that. I was like, this is something, this is the way I am. This is the way I exist. You know, is there some sort of, you know, this is the way you have to dress and be in this space? And she was like, no, do you? And I appreciated that. And that's also one of the reasons why I was like, okay, yeah. But like the way I show up on campus, the way I create my spaces, the way I engage with students and with community is art, it's expression, it's community. I think about like, I love just random playlists and sharing that. I think about how shifts in kind of maybe media and the way we see ourselves. I was talking recently about like kind of like all of the art of like the late 80s and the 90s when thinking about like all the television shows and movies and like just seeing like this particular spread of Blackness on our TV screens in prime time that, you know, the world is engaging with. And then I think, you know, there's a particular view for those possibilities. And then I think as there were more being added in, I think, you know, maybe there were some buttons pushed where, you know, the powers that be in those kinds of spaces were like, okay, so like all of that, we're not gonna fight them. What we'll do is we'll add diversity to all shows. So there's like that one token Black friend, or maybe two. And what I think about is, you know, there continues to be Black spaces, Black art, in kind of like major spaces, but I think it's kind of shifted and changed, but it's also challenged us to create beyond those spaces.
Right.
So that, you know, I don't have to have, you know, NBC to see myself. I can go on YouTube, I can find these streaming sites, I can, you know, engage with indie art, I can find people on Instagram. That's one of my favorite places to find people, you know, all sorts of like art and poetry and all different sorts of perspectives, and that we can find ourselves and create ourselves in spaces that aren't as gatekept. And that it's important for us to encourage ourselves just to practice, just to be. Like, it doesn't have to be something you're gonna hang up on a wall. I do a lot of like voice notes or like ideas of things that pop into my head, and sometimes I share them, sometimes they're just there, sometimes they'll come back around in a event I'll put on, or a conversation I'll initiate, or a presentation. And I think just opening yourself to try and be as free as you want to be, to do the things that, you know, people might have said, like, oh, like, you know, that's not what Black people do, that's not what Black women do, that's not what Black men do, that's not what, you know, whatever it is, do it, try it, engage with it. However you want to express yourself is valid and it's real, and you don't, you know, need permission, you don't need to have done X, Y, and Z or check the boxes in order to express yourself and offer possibilities. I love the framing of, you know, I'm gonna say it's 20 more cents, I don't know, like radical imagination. And like dreaming of the world we want to create, dreaming of the way we want to be. I am constantly always thinking about, like, you know, who I want to be. I want to be a Dr. Williams myself.
Yeah.
Soon. I have like 4 or 5 years, but it'll happen.
On the journey.
On a journey. But like, I dream of, you know, really interesting community spaces, or maybe one day becoming a cartoon voice actor. I dream of all the kind of ways that I want to be. I dream of the ways that I want the world to look like for, you know, my children and my niece. And that dreaming in of itself is art, is expression. And it's important to share those things, you know, however you want to, whether it's just sending somebody a text of like, this is something I made, or like, look at this, or putting it up on the internet somewhere. Allows you to share and find that community and find those interesting connections, but it also allows you to be a possibility model for others. When you show up, when you are in those spaces, when you say, yeah, like, you know, I, you know, want to write a short story, and I just thought about it, I wanted to write. And I share that with, you know, like a student that I'm talking to is like, yeah, you know, what have you been working on? Beyond kind of like, you know, the work or the volunteering or whatever else, the tasking part of that conversation. It's like, oh, this is something I've been doing. And they're like, oh, really? You know, like, that's something I've been thinking about. Or like, do you want to read it? Like, connection, like, it's offering the possibilities and the perspectives and the things beyond kind of the frameworks of how you're supposed to be, of the kind of conversations you're supposed to have, of the way you're supposed to parent, of the way you're supposed to be in community.
I feel like you're like reading my mind, because every time I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm gonna talk about that. I'm thinking about that too. You mentioned something. But no, I think you both raised some really valid points in a way. I think the one point that really I wanted to try to talk about, like, this idea of like permission. I think I talked to Jessica about this, and that the only person, oftentimes we're waiting for someone to give us permission to be, and the real person who we need permission from is ourselves. And what I mean by that in terms of like your Blackness, your identity, your femininity, right? Like what it means to, I think a lot of what it means to be a Black woman in spaces. And it's like little decisions. Like I remember getting dressed today, I was like, what Jakora do I want to be today? Am I Jakora, director of the Robeson Center at Rutgers, or I just want to be Jakora? And that was like how I said what lapel pin I wanted to wear. It's Tupac. As opposed to like my R alumni pin, right? Like what does it mean when I put that R on or things like that? And so that how you give yourself permission to be and just embrace parts of your identity that can help other people. I think about, again, like when I'm in spaces, I'm like, what are you working on for yourself? How do you take art, whatever it is for your magic to show up? And even, you know, I'm a new mom and I think about my son, we only watch like Black cartoons, and like what I want for him to have like positive representations of Blackness around him. And I think I'm in awe of people like Jessica who grew up in like Wakanda, as she says it, because it teaches you to appreciate the things that people might tell you aren't positive representations of Blackness, right? Your aunt with the really long fingernails. Like, you don't have long fingernails when you work in a professional office. That's ghetto. And it's like, no, they're just someone's artistic expression is their nails, right? And it gives me, remembering that gives me permission to not to wear like just beige nail colors at work. Little things like that, in the way that like white supremacy is like just so permeate how you can be in places. And so it makes me think about, I guess like my final question is, what do you need to feel seen in spaces?
I'm like, not much. I just show up. These days. But honestly, what I think it takes for me to show up in a space and feel seen. I just have to take a breath. I think I have to take a breath, and what's coming to my mind is I sent Geraldine this text message. Geraldine turned it into wall art.
It's in my office, so when you come by, if anybody ever wants to visit me, it's in my office.
But Geraldine was like going through, I don't know what you were going through.
It was literally after the day after Trump was elected. Mm-hmm. And we were, well, you were at UCSD by then.
Yeah.
But we were both still in San Diego in very white spaces, and like the experience of like having to go to work, support students.
Mm-hmm.
That's the tough part.
And like little things. It was wild. And I was on Facebook and I was like, this is so hard.
And I wrote to her, I was like, you're gonna do it because your mother did it and her mother did it, and it's in us to do it. I don't remember what the full quote was, but it was just like, take a breath, remember who you are, and then like get back to the business of being you. And I think that for me, like, what does it take to be in a space is honestly just remembering that like I belong in whatever space that I'm in. If I'm there, then like there was a reason that I was asked universally, spiritually, like to be in that space, to be in that room. And I so believe in like that higher power, I guess, that like it really does just take a minute for me to just breathe and settle in and say, I'm supposed to be here. Like my existence is not an accident, and this timing is not an accident. And so just show up. It's that self-encouragement. I think, one of the things that I write about, and one of the things that I often am fighting against is like, shame is a tool of the oppressor. Ooh. And so when we fall into shame spirals, shame patterns, shaming behaviors, and we kind of use shame a lot to get people to fall in line. Mm-hmm. And when we push back on shame, we reclaim freedom and we reclaim sovereignty over ourselves. And so when I tell myself, like I breathe and I say, no, you're supposed to be here. You're not gonna make me feel ashamed for being too Black, too feminine, or not feminine enough. too queer or not queer enough, too fat or not fat enough, all these things. You're not gonna tell me I'm not enough or too much, because I'm just enough to be inhabiting the space that I'm in. And I believe that. So.
I will say, I'm not there yet or all the time. I think for
You're
me,
gonna get it.
it's always a journey, y'all. It's a practice. That's the thing that I think is like I think it's a practice. I think of the different ways that I, find myself in spaces. And I think when I see other people that I've gone before, when I think about all of the work like ancestors have put in order for me to be in a space. And it's like, the path has been laid.
Mm-hmm.
And like you're where you're supposed to be. I try to surround myself and be in community with people that know me and love me and respect me and will speak my name into spaces like you, into this space. And I also have those moments when I'm like, I have a little bit of doubt. I create my practice, whether it's, like a playlist. I love music, but yeah, a playlist, it's Beyonce and Mary J. Blige and all sorts of folks, City Girls, Megan, all sorts of folks, Anita, like all different folks that like their stories, their music resonates with me. Sometimes it's even, I like notes and cards, so I save notes and cards, and whether it's kind of just like family ones and friend ones, sometimes it's, messages from my students and from the community partners I work with. I try to tap back into those things and see what you have done has impacted others. Mm-hmm. What you have done is evidence. And that centers you in those spaces, and help me to be seen. And it's also being particular. Like what feels right for you. Sometimes people will offer you opportunities, and you get that feeling in your gut, like, is that the right thing for me? Am I going to show up and be seen? Am I going to show up and be supported? Am I going to show up and have an experience that matters to me? And so there's a judgment process, a discernment process, but I think it's all those different bits and pieces. It's the practice of how you hype yourself. It's a practice of how you love yourself. It's a practice of how people show up for you. It's a practice of how people offer you space. It's a practice of how you want to take space. But it's for you to determine that, of like what makes you feel good, what you're dressing in, what you're eating, what you're listening to, your meditation, the breaths you take before you step into those spaces. It's all a practice.
What is the journey? Is that?
Oh, sorry, can I?
Get your mic.
Yeah. Are you guys ready for questions?
Sure.
Awesome.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. We're getting your mic up.
Is that like a goal?
Can you just wait for the mic so everyone can hear? Sorry, thanks.
I was just asking about, what is the journey? Is that a goal, or are you searching, or is it like how scientists trying to solve something or experiment?
I think it's always evolving. I personally think that. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about like how we assign meaning to things, and also like as you define things for yourself, you uncover and learn new things. And so that's what Jesus said, like it's like a destination, like, or it's a journey. Like you get to one place and you realize like, hey, this isn't the end of the road. Now I'm here and I've uncovered new things. Things look different. So how do I now go on this new journey of where I am now? That's what I think of. I think about even in like my own personal life. Like again, where I came from, I had certain thoughts around. What it means to be middle class? Let's go for that, right? Like what it means to be Black and middle class? Because I came from a very economically disadvantaged background. So now I'm here. I'm like, this looks different than I thought it might have looked. How does that show up for me? And now what's the next journey? So I assign that meaning to it. And keep defining it for myself.
I think we're always learning and evolving, and so it's a consistent process.
So you have just summed up my whole dissertation.
And I want to say, yes,
Right, what are you
I just want to say that I'm a giant. I take up big space. And so the question I want to ask is, so I create, during COVID, I did 2 clothing collections. And my friends always want me to sell everything. So for Black women, it's always about our labor and our production. And so how do we not turn our creation, our creativity into labor and production?
Oh my gosh, you are really talking to me. I think it's an intuitive call, at least for me, and for very similar reasons. Like with my art, I've had people ask me, "Oh, can I buy this? Can I have that?" I'm like, it's a journal entry to me, so it feels so personal to give it away, or to sell it would be like, for what? Because to me, like the assigning of value of something so personal is so odd to me. I don't know how I would assign value to something like that. But also, I understand that my offerings can help other people and can inspire things in other people. And so, kind of my happy medium with that is I figure out, okay, well, what are you happy with? What would you be happy with offering, right? What are you okay with giving away, and what's too sacred to let go?
Because my friends often say to me, they said, if I was a robber, I would steal everything. Just because I just don't see it.
Mhm.
I don't put any value to it. I'm just being me.
Yeah.
Could you repeat?
Oh, I said,
It's right.
No, my friends often say to me, they said, if they were a robber, they would steal everything from me. Because I just, like, off the top of my head, quotes, ideas, whatever.
Mhm.
I don't put any value on it. I don't,
Right.
because I just freely give it.
Mhm.
And their position is that I should not give so much away. But I don't put the same value on it. I'm just being me. Like I said, because my dissertation is about how do Black women be.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, we all come into this kind of ontological existential crisis.
Right.
And then it forces us to just step back. And I do the practice of self-imposed marginalization.
Mhm.
And I go to my quiet place.
Me too.
And then I come back out. And when I come back out, I create, I write, I preach, I draw, I sew,
Mhm.
I talk. And when I'm talking, everybody's like, "Oh, we should just steal this from you." I don't care.
Yeah. I think if intuitively it doesn't assign or doesn't hold a value, let it go. Let it go. I have been sitting on this idea forever called Spirited Occasions. It's a liquor store that also sells flowers and gift cards, because you always need all of those things and they're never sold in the same place. And more than I would love to become rich, or I like coming up with that idea, I really just want it to exist. So I think when you spread ideas or when you give things away like that, you're playing a role in someone else's journey, right? You're helping water someone else's garden. So I think it's perfectly fine.
I would just add to, I think this is my opinion, because I have always been like, hey, Black women what they're worth, there's high laboring for free. But also if it doesn't feel like labor to you to give it away, then keep being you. When it starts to feel like, I feel like you're giving more of me than you want more of me than I'm willing to give, then it's like, oops, skirt, you gotta pay for that. That's more than what I'm willing to give you that I want to give. Right.
Hi. Thank you for being here and for sharing. I was tearing up just listening to your words. It's like morsels of food. So I want to thank you both, all of you, for sharing. I was brought here because I thought, well, it's a Paul Robeson honoring, so I was hoping maybe we could get a few moments of just sort of any thoughts you have about his life, his legacy, because the younger generation, myself, really are detached from, his amazing contribution. So if you could maybe share a few moments about Paul Robeson. Secondly, I just want to make a comment. I think we really should be brought to shame as a country, because maybe that's what it will take to sort of move us forward. I mean, we're speaking about things that we really shouldn't be speaking about that are still occurring, burning of flesh, torturous acts. They're not happening offshore, they're happening here. And I can speak from personal experience about that. So I think maybe there's something that really has to happen to get us from a point of just talking and sharing and having this grief to some serious action. And that's something for all of us, Black, white, yellow, in between, to do. But thanks again. If you have some, maybe, like I said, remarks about Paul Robeson, I appreciate it. Maybe something I can learn. And also, is there a date for his house? Because I know they've been speaking about this renovation to the original house where he was here in Princeton.
Dr. Joy would know.
The 25th.
I think I can answer some of those questions.
Go for it.
Unfortunately, we're running.
Just a second, sorry.
Oh, the bus has to go, right?
The
The bus to Philly.
Yeah, the bus to Philly is leaving, and unfortunately, yeah, let's just say that Paul was fortunate, we are fortunate, he was born in this community, and we are using his anniversary, the 125th anniversary of his birth, as an opportunity to revive and make clear that his was a life of substance, and that we want to preserve that. This, like most communities, are changing quite a bit. The Paul Robeson House, for those of you who are in Princeton, it's right across the street. So I urge you to visit with us as often as you can and to learn more about this very, very important gentleman. Thank you.
You can always go to the website for information.
Yes, you can.
Can I just answer, just in thinking about your question around Robeson's legacy, I had the privilege of being in space with Susan Robeson this week. Susan Robeson is Paul Robeson's last living relative. She's his granddaughter. And she was talking to one of my students who we had a Robeson Week poetry competition with the co-artists and gatekeepers of truth. And what she had said was that Robeson was a man of his own politics. He didn't subscribe. You couldn't get him to say what he didn't believe in, right? Like if he wasn't going to say I'm going Democratic, I didn't really truly feel that. And encouraging people to find and use their voice. And so, and thinking about that as his legacy, anytime you can define yourself for yourself, then you can define what matters to you, whether it's your point you said, like we as a country should feel shame about things that are happening. The people who need to feel the shame it's really a white supremacy, right? They don't feel shame about anything that they've done. You can't shame people who don't have it. And so you have to define for yourself, okay, how can I know how this impacts me, what I want from this, to keep fighting for change? Because that's what Robeson would do. He would use his voice to say, this is wrong and you need to change. Whether you feel ashamed or not, you need to change this because it's problematic. It's harming people. The way you take advantage of people and their labor, it's harming people. They don't feel shame about it, but they still have a responsibility because they have humanity. They deserve respect. Black people deserve respect. Welsh workers deserve respect. And so things like that. So that's how I would bring it back to his legacy.
I know that I have at least
Sorry.
two more questions. No, not at all. I almost want to end on that. I know that I have at least.
That's my question, and then she was trying to add her point, because I asked
Oh, yeah.
if they could just add a point of a legacy or something about Paul Robeson. Yeah, I apologize.
No.
She didn't get a chance.
I was gonna say that one sentence, I think, to Paul Robeson, that investment of self was divesting from the system, right? So when I take the time to self-define what is freedom for me, what is liberation for me, what is right for me, what is just for me, and not like I decide what justice is, but I'm looking at, is this just and is this right? I think that it pulls us out of the system that we were handed. And then if we don't participate in that system, it cannot uphold. And I think that is, for me, that's what I gained from learning about Paul Robeson. It's like, as an artist, you don't tell me what's on the canvas. I paint. Like, I'm the author, right? And so if I am defining it and if I am creating, whatever you give me doesn't hold, well, it doesn't hold anything. And so, you know, I'm really careful about, like, I understand what you're saying when you're like, they need to feel shame. I agree. And also, like, the master's tool cannot dismantle the master's house. So it has to be a different shift of consciousness, right? It's like, I can't win by shaming you, but I will win by claiming humanity for myself.
And others.
And others, exactly, and others. And even you too, right? That's the hardest work.
Gerald, did you want to say anything?
Go ahead. Well, first off, thank you so much for your insightful, point of views and stories. I really enjoyed it. And so I just had a question. As Black women in positions of power, there are a lot of pressures and expectations that can come with, your responsibilities. And so I just wanted to ask, what are some tactics, some skills that help you kind of not crumble under that pressure or not give into that pressure? What are some things that help you kind of push through that?
It's really true. That's in the essay Dr. Jessica put out, the funhouse mirror of expectations. That is real. Like, I have such high expectations of myself and others that it can feel very heavy. But there's a quote, I have a couple of quotes, two things I ask myself. What will Beyonce do? I ask myself that because you never hear anyone says that it was hard to work with Beyonce. They say she has high expectations, but she's passionate. And when I ask myself that, it reminds me, you're enough. You have what it takes. Just trust yourself, but be gracious and kind to others, right? So that helps dismantle the expectations, because I remind myself that whatever I have to offer is going to be good enough. And there's another quote that I go by from Nipsey Hussle that said, it's not on you, it's in you. And that takes a lot of pressure off. It's not on me to make sure, every student succeeds at my campus. It's in me to be passionate and want to provide spaces for people to find themselves, to develop themselves. And that reminds me again that I'm doing the right work. And that's how I can push that. And also, I would say, remembering what's important to me. And that shifts and changes. Now, I'm a new mom. My son's going to be a year next week. And so even having just a baby, reminds me there's something beyond work. Someone else needs me. He doesn't care what I do. He doesn't care that I'm a boss. He doesn't care if I'm in a doctorate program too. He doesn't ever care if I finish my dissertation. It matters to me. But also someone who just loves me for me helps me remember, all that stuff doesn't matter. I'm a human. It's okay. Let your guard down. Have fun.
That part. Yeah, my whole essay is about that. But honestly, what I talk about is kind of throwing out the definition of what I previously believed it meant to be a strong Black woman, which was resilient and I can do anything. And you ask me to do it, I'm gonna do it to the 10th degree and some. And then I was assaulted and I got tired and I got anxiety disorder. And I realized that I couldn't do all of those things. And not only could I not, I didn't want to. I didn't want to ever try to get back to that person. I realized that I'm allowed to be exhausted. I'm allowed to be mediocre. Imagine. I'm allowed to be, I can walk in the room and say nothing. I don't have to be fine. I took a lot of pressure off of myself in those moments because on one hand, I couldn't compete with who I was before this big traumatic event. And it was the biggest saving grace that I couldn't compete with that person because that was a mask and that was a facade to some extent. And now I feel so grateful to be I've been on job interviews where I've had a panic attack and I'm just pouring sweat and I just have to tell them, oh yeah, I have anxiety disorder. So I'm gonna tell you now, if you have one of those policies where I can't call out the day of, we're not gonna work. And I was years ago afraid to have that conversation. And now it's I'm a human and this is my accommodation. And I have a student who was a white man who always says to me, negotiate like a white man.
Right.
If they would accommodate a white man for it, they can accommodate you. This is what my student will always tell me. I'm like, so, this feels so visceral, but then I think, you're right. Why am I working so hard? And so, yeah, I just give myself a lot of permission to just not, you know, like I feel like I have to have this done. And I'm like, do you really? You don't really. And you're still going to be okay. People are still going to love you. It's okay. Like, I was walking up here today and I was like, oh, my foot looks a little ashy. And Deborah was laughing at me because she was like, you got on sandals? Nobody have on sandals yet. And I was like, well, I'm from California and it should be hot. And then I was like, you know what? Like, this has zero impact on my ability to be up here, hold space, talk you through what I had to talk you through. Like, I'm still a strong Black woman, even though I've embraced my ashy foot and my panic disorder and my, like, you know, my mess ups and my whatever. You just own it, whoever you are. Like, that's what they don't want you to do. The arbitrary, they don't want you to love yourself. You think about how many, this is in my dissertation, how many industries would fail if we woke up tomorrow and we loved ourselves? If we didn't need the Yeezys, the Nike, the Ivy Park, our 10-step skincare moisturizer, our fresh like barber cut, if we didn't need those things and we just woke up and I loved who I look like in the mirror, how would I exist in the world differently than I would today? And I think that's how you start to reclaim and redefine a little bit of like what it means to be a Black woman. That's how you identify, right? Like, when I say, like, nobody gets to tell me that Black women can't fill in the blank, because if I do it, then yes, we can. I remember I was a little bit like, Black people can't swim. And me and my sisters, we did swimming and diving. Black people can't swim. Well, I can, so am I not? So it's just, yeah, constantly pushing back against it and saying, like, I can be excellent in some ways, but I can also be mediocre. And I reserve the right to do all of it. Because I think that's a lot of the times what we don't get to do. We get a lot about exceptionalism and being excellent and being great, but what we often are not allowed to do is fail. We're not allowed to be mediocre. We're not allowed to just be okay. You know, it's like, I made a B. Okay. Did you learn a little something? Did you pass the class? Is it over? But the thought of, oh my gosh, I'm not perfect, I didn't show up, I see it all the time with my students. It's like they debilitate, they can't cope. And I'm like, that B is gonna be the best gift I can ever give you in your life. You need to learn how to fail. Beyonce, you're never too good to fail. You have to learn how to do it. And so the faster, I guess, you can learn how to redefine yourself for yourself and kind of try to make meaning of your own identity in your own way, the happier you'll be.
Yeah. If you define who you want to be, how you want to be as a Black woman in positions of power. You define, what does that power mean? What does that look like? And you don't let other people put that on you.
Mm-hmm.
You might, depending on, how you define that power, if you're thinking about it in a job setting, like there are some things you have to, take into account, like, job descriptions.
Yeah.
But, you can do that and center who you want to be, how you want to be. Like, we don't have to live into those archetypes. Those archetypes are there to, constrain us and to stress us. Put us in our places. And so, like, I have to remind myself, like, if I don't answer this email, is somebody gonna die? No. Like, I can leave that till Monday. And it's a practice of pushing and fighting yourself, but power looks lots of different ways. Power looks like being quiet. Power looks like saying no. Power looks like I need to take a break. Power looks like knowing your rights and using those rights, it looks like all sorts of things. And so it's defining for you, putting those boundaries in place. It's a practice. You're not going to just do it in one day. And then making sure other people know, whether it's the people that you just need to say no to, or it's the people around you that are going to help you reinforce those things. They're going to help remind you of how you define yourself. That's what's going to help. That was just some tips and tricks, but that, you know, there isn't one way to be. While I love Oprah, I do not want to be Oprah. Yeah. I want to be,
Can't be over.
Just time for one more question, unfortunately.
Thank you, ladies, very much for being here. So my question touches on that old thing called code switching. So code switching is almost become a running joke, particularly for Black women. So as a wife and mother, our two youngest girls are teenagers. And what I have found is that for me, I grew up in the city of Detroit going to private schools in a family who believed in speaking a particular way. So code switching is not just a euphemism, it's just a natural thing for me, depending on who I'm speaking to. So our children who are already facing racism from both directions because they're biracial, our youngest has a challenge. She's challenged with the concept that her mother code switches. So for me, I love that I code switch because it has enabled me to communicate across barriers, across lines, and to be a bridge in various cultures, right? She's not capable of that code switching because she did not grow up the way that I grew up. And so she struggles to communicate on both sides when she feels like she should be able to. So I have raised our children, or my husband and I have raised our children to the best of our ability in terms of not allowing anyone to put them in a box. That has been their whole lives. That has been my thing. You do not have to check a box. You don't have to be a box. You are whoever you decide that you are within reason, right? So how do we bridge that gap? Because I can't relate 100% because I'm not in their shoes. I don't have their background either. So how do we bridge that gap with the young people who are trying to understand this new, it's not new, but it's newer than it should be in terms of being who they are, finding their own identity, and being true to themselves, right? Not keeping it real, but keeping it true to yourself. How do we bridge that gap so that they can understand even further that because this is the way that I am, is not necessarily the way that you can cross communicate. So how do we negotiate that bridge gap for young people who don't understand a lot of this yet? They're still growing and learning and developing.
Yeah, I would say it's storytelling, just to some extent. I mean, I think, my parents lived a very different experience than I do now. And I mean, part of it is kind of getting older and being able to access some of those stories, but it is kind of laying the context, telling stories, to kind of explain, this is my lived experience, and this is what brought me to be able to meet your father and, create you and create this space in this home, and that it's a journey, and it's a process, and that it helps inform who they are, but that they are individual of you. My mom always has this joke where she was like, I thought about naming the kids Not Me, because you're not me. I don't know. It's like a corny joke. But it's a way of understanding that, we don't have to parrot our parents, and that, we are inspired and planted by our community, by the folks around us. And there's all sorts of experiences that, my mother and my father had, very much integrating schools here in New Jersey, which is a time. But I didn't have that. But it's having those sharing, I code switch because this has been my experience or part of this. And you share what you can, because, sometimes not full stories are able to be accessed depending on, the age or the perspective of your youth. But I think that helps kind of explaining that, this is a piece of that. And then also just listening, I think being able to say like, what does this sound like? Or, you know, what would it feel like to code switch? Or like, what does that look like? Or what do you think of if you were to kind of access this kind of experience that I had? And then also being able to, you know, create that environment to say, whether it's teachers or, you know, other kind of folks that are advising, supporting your kid, that, you know, I am continuing to draw the line in the sand that you're not going to put my kid in a box, that you're going to create this space for them to discover and grow in and of themselves. That's just I don't have any kids.
As you were talking, I thought about something Susan Robeson said to me. We're talking about something in the way we were describing Paul Robeson or something. She said, I wouldn't say that. You know, put that term in the historical context. And that's what I would say to like our children, Gen Alpha, the TikTok generation, if you will. You have the Gen Alpha. I think that's what's called Generation Alpha, like Gen Alpha, Alpha Gen. Whatever is after Gen Z. That's the generation we're in now. But they have to putting themselves in a historical context, which means you're not an old person, putting you in your historical context, right? There was a time where code switching is a survival mechanism for many people to this day, especially people who are, you know, people I work with today who are a few years older than me. You had to code switch to get opportunity. And that's okay, because you had to do what you had to do to survive. And I think with helping, whereas now the generation is like, no, you're going to accept me as I am, however I am, my hair color, I'm going to have purple hair, green hair, whereas there were times we were told you could not do that in professional spaces. And so I learned a lot from Gen Alpha, the students I work with now, because they teach me what it's like to be authentic in spaces, but then I have to reconcile what that means with what I already know. And a lot of being is unlearning what I thought was respectable enough to understand it. As long as I'm there, I deserve to be there. Again, even today, I'm going to be on this panel. How do I have to dress? Is it okay to wear jeans? Of course it's okay to wear jeans if you're going to feel comfortable in jeans. Like, no one defines that for you. But there was something in me that said it might not be okay to do that. And so, you know, my generation would say there were things that were happening in the civil rights movement. We wouldn't get hosed and attacked by dogs. They would never do that to me, except if we lived in that time. In that historical context, we would not have known anything different. And so I think that's that gap. And so I think it's a lot of storytelling. And for your children to understand, it doesn't make me a bad person to code switch. I had to do it. I chose to do it because I wanted to fit in. I wanted to accomplish certain things, and it has served me well. But I can learn from you and how I can be more authentic in spaces and define that for myself, what that means. We could all learn from each other.
I just think it's so important for us to have intergenerational relationships.
Absolutely.
Intergenerational relationships.
Yeah.
All the time.
Thank
All
you,
the time.
Carolyn. Thank you.
I just to add to that, I just want to reframe code switching and offer this reframe. It's not so much that you're code switching as you're speaking to be heard or you're showing up to be seen. And so when you go from talking like this, like you're talking to family, friends, to talking like this and speaking more, it's because when I speak like this, I'm speaking to an audience who's not used to hearing me like this. I'm speaking to be heard. And it has nothing to do with trying to prove I'm more intelligent or trying to prove I'm Black enough or trying to prove, I want my audience to receive me. And so offer your kids that, because they absolutely code switch. From classroom to TikTok to whatever else, they're switching all the time. They don't know it. And so when you frame it as in, how many times a day do you change the way that you show up to be heard by your audience? That's code switching.
Yep.
But they see it differently. They're framing it differently. And oftentimes I think it gets pejorative, like it becomes a bad thing. Oh, you're code switching. I'm trying to be heard. It doesn't change who I am. It doesn't negate my Blackness. It doesn't make, and I do know there are some things with respectability politics and blah, blah, but by and large, I think if I'm speaking in a way to be heard by the recipient, by the audience, that's an effective communicator. like you said, that's survival. That's a way that that's a skill. my mom and I would have this conversation. Well, she'd be like, "You never had the Black experience," because I didn't. She went to the first Black high school in Atlanta, Booker T. Washington High School. She went to an HBCU. She was always like around Blackness. I grew up, and she moved me. I went to private schools in the suburbs and da da da. And so she's like, "You don't know the Black experience." I was like, "We have a different Black experience. How about that?"
Yeah.
Right? Like you have your Black experience, and I have mine because I had the raising in the rights experience. I was not, and so it's like, we're not a monolith. And that includes biracial and multiracial. My sisters are biracial. And my youngest sister she doesn't identify herself as a Black woman. And I don't blame her because the world doesn't see her like that either. The world never responded to her as a Black woman. So again, that code switch, that's her audience has never seen her in that way. So for her to show up sometimes, people kind of like, "Why are you wearing braids? Why are you wearing kente stuff?" And she's like, "Well, my mom was Black." But you know what I mean? Like, it's to her, that feels like you code switch too far into Blackness. But, you know, it's like, so how do I get to take up those spaces? I'm speaking to be heard by whoever's trying to receive me. And I think if we reframe it like that, it gets a little bit further.